You're listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport Media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have Dakota Wood, who's with the Heritage Foundation, who so many wonderful experts join us from there throughout the years, and we're happy to have you join us, Dakota. This is Brett and John, and welcome to the Final Say Radio Show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Well, Dakota, I'm glad that you could join us because it's important that we address the Iranian nuclear program and the negotiations that have been ongoing for, it seems like decades, but it's been a long time. And I'm getting a little confused because it seemed to me that at some point we were demanding that the Iranian nuclear program give up many of the facilities that they were working on, that they reduced the amount of production that they had going on, and then also that there were restrictions, the level of enrichment of uranium and also the quantity, amongst many other issues. But it seems to me that each time this administration tacks on another 3 or 6 months of negotiation time, but additionally, they seem to keep backing off from the original demands. And now we're just basically, it seems like John Kerry and the team have offered, we're just going to reduce the amount of enrichment.
Yeah, I mean, the administration has really put itself in a very bad corner, and that means the United States and the rest of the free world, really, and not holding Iran accountable. We've seen some progress with the sanctions. Leaky though they are, there has been some progress. But our inability to deal with other regional problems, especially the one in Syria, has made us beholden to Iran to use their influence, both in Syria and especially in Iraq. And so the response you're seeing from the administration is a bunch of incentives to get Iran to help us out with other problems. But the price to that, to their assistance, is for us to go easy on the Iranian nuclear program, which was a much larger and more serious strategic problem. So it's no surprise to me that we're seeing that from this administration, and it's certainly to our detriment over the long term.
Yeah, and I agree with you. If you had to list the most critical threats that the United States is facing today, I would be ranking Iran ahead of even ISIS or ahead of what's going on in Syria, ahead of what happened in Libya, ahead of taking down Mubarak in Egypt, and all the other things that have been going on for the last few years. I don't think this administration really clearly understands what it is that Iran has been doing for the last 4 decades now. But, to me, on the battlefield, even against the various terrorist factions, it's been a lot of Iranian money. It's been a lot of Iranian training, even Iranian, troops maybe in disguise. But training, weapons, money, support, the support of the radical fundamentalism, they've been doing this directly against us and our interests for decades now. So they are at war with us, and this administration clearly does not understand that. And I think that if you're Israel or any of our other allies in that region, you have to be shaking your head and wondering what is really going on with the American foreign policy right now.
Well, that's just it. I mean, what we need is statecraft and legitimate statesmen. This is why Israel recognizes the long-term strategic problem that Iran is, and it's why we're seeing such juvenile behavior out of the White House, that they're chasing headlines. Terrorism is bad, I get that. A terrorist blowing himself up in the middle of Washington, D.C. or Los Angeles is a bad day, but it's got nothing in comparison to an Iranian fully weaponized nuclear program that then spurs nuclear proliferation throughout the Middle East. Iran ends up going nuclear in terms of weaponized capability. That'll be in Saudi Arabia and in Egypt and Turkey. I mean, it's just going to be a house of cards that's going to fall. And that's the long-term threat. But as you say, even now, Iran is using its money and its influence to fund fundamentalist Islamist terrorism that impacts the United States directly and our interests, and certainly our allies and friends in Europe. They're the power behind the scenes so much that has gone wrong in Iraq. They're causing additional problems in the Middle East. They're funding of Hezbollah and Hamas and all the other bad actors in that area. And to ignore this problem just because it's not a headline grabber, to me, it just shows the JV team that we have running things here in Washington.
I would argue they're less than JV. They're elementary school at best. But when you look at Iran and what could they possibly do to help us in any of these situations? If anything, they've helped create a lot of these situations. And I would think that there are other, between maybe Saudi, Israeli, Egyptian, there's other intelligence agencies in the region and other people that we could entrust to get information to help support some of the operations and things that we have to do. And why, I don't even see how you could trust Iran to begin with.
Well, that's just it. You can't. I mean, any intelligence that they might generate would be automatically suspect. And if we acted on that, it would be in Iran's interest, not in our own, right? But what this administration is looking for in terms of help is to make the immediate pressing problems go away. So if Iran can use its influence with other actors and kind of put them back in the box, and it lessens the immediate political problem of this administration, even though you've now strengthened Iran's hand and you have put us in an even more disadvantageous position relative to their nuclear program. So, it's again, our inability or unwillingness to shoulder the burden and responsibilities of the preeminent superpower and see to our own needs and interests and buttress those of true allies and friends. And instead we are now leaning on regimes that have our interests at the very bottom of the stack. And all this is against the great competition that's going on between Iran and Saudi Arabia, between Shia and Sunni and Persian and Arab. So we just seem to be blind to these larger geostrategic competitions and, in fact, are enabling the activities of Iran in this great struggle.
Yeah, I mean, those are all good points. And before John jumps in here, I just have one thing that I feel like we have to add to this discussion, and that is we were willing to go into Iraq the second time because of the argument of weapons of mass destruction, which there's some recent revelations on that as well. But we were willing to go after Iraq. I've always questioned why we haven't really dealt with North Korea and why we aren't dealing with, in an appropriate manner, in my opinion, with Iran. And because, again, you could draw lines in the sand and say to Bashar al-Assad in Syria, well, if you use chemical weapons is crossing the line. Obviously it's not, and we've said the same thing about other places. But what we're establishing is America now has a policy of you could do what you want, we may say things, but we will not act. And what we're going to act on, we're not really sure.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail there, that if we say a certain policy and we don't follow up on that, that it damages our credibility and it makes us look weak. Weakness invites bullying behavior and people taking advantage, of our position and perception of weakness, and it just generally exacerbates problems that wouldn't otherwise be the case. As far as how we react to certain actors, I'm a firm believer that our responses have to be tuned to the unique set of characteristics. So, North Korea did develop a nuclear capability. That means that they have nuclear weapons. So trying to take those away really endangers South Korea, and especially the mega city of Seoul. So that has to be handled in one particular way. If we allow Iran to have a nuclear capability, that's going to invite some kind of response from Israel. It'll be just dramatically harder to deal with that. So I think if we're going to move, we have to do it very aggressively before that happens. And then some of these other actors you mentioned, again, the response being tuned to the characteristics and the capabilities of the entity that we'd be operating against.
Dakota, this is John. It's very important to consider Israel into this equation. I'm glad you brought it up, because if you look at just what's going on right now with these worldwide legitimization campaigns, of which you can argue the State Department, especially under John Kerry, seems to be complicit in and not very defensive of. Israel has literally every day you see something in the news that gives Israel less confidence that the U.S. or the EU has its back in anything other than occasional outgassing of political diatribe. And the real moves is very much against Israel and very much in support of many of the Islamist regimes. So with that being said, the idea of Israel standing down at some point and not taking unilateral action, I think, is growing less and less likely every day. On the flip side, it's growing higher in risk every day because Iran continues its weapons programs at a very rapid pace. So to me, the risk here and the question I'd like you to analyze is, if Israel is literally forced to go in because the U.S. and Europe do not stand up appropriately to Iran, the potential destabilizing effect on the world economy could be very quick and very dramatic because of the effect on the obvious Gulf oil supply. So I wanted you to touch on that risk factor in general.
Absolutely. I mean, for Israel, it's an existential matter. I mean, it's their national survival. It's a postage stamp of a country. It has the most vibrant economy and the greatest opportunities for anybody in a country in that entire region. So why we don't support them more strongly, it beggars the imagination. So they just cannot allow Iran to go nuclear. If Iran does, whether or not they use a weapon against Israel or not, it will embolden all the minions of Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, and others, to then start picking ever more lethal fights with Israel, because these other characters will know that Iran has their back, right? So for Israel, I think that is a true red line, that they will act militarily with or without U.S. support to eliminate a nuclear threat from Iran. Another part to this is the weaker the U.S. looks and the weaker our guarantees look to friends and supporters of those countries, it undermines the various regimes or governments in that particular region. And in particular, I'm thinking of Jordan. Jordan has been a key buffer state and a great supporter of Israel in terms of its national security. But if Jordan doesn't believe the United States is there with Israel and doing something to put down Iran, then Jordan will become weak in the knees, and Israel will lose that buffer capability as well. So nobody wins if Iran goes nuclear, except Iran. And the things could go very, very bad. Because as you pointed out, the global energy market, oil is a fungible commodity. So though we have lessened our dependence on Middle Eastern oil and fracking, these other efforts, the world doesn't have that same capability or advantage. And you can see price spikes upwards of $150 to $200 a barrel.
And you can only imagine the positive impact that would have on funding continued weapons development, not just with Iran, but also with Russia. The great radio host, Bob Grant, may he rest in peace, in New York, had a brilliant phrase he used to say, regarding, bad actors, bad characters. Essentially, once they serve notice that they want to steal from you, rape us, maim us, kill us, that poisonous creature must be destroyed. And I think that's one of the big problems that I have with this entire equation from our government is to continue to pretend in any kind of facade that there's even a likelihood of a sustainable or reasonable deal with Iran, to me, seems ludicrous, because you cannot ever, in my opinion, judge somebody's intent by their words. You have to look at their actions. And if you look at whether it's the fuse factory that just blew up the other day, the centrifuges, the level of refinement, the constant death threats to Israel, the delivery systems, including the missiles, radars, anti-aircraft, and anti-ship defenses. I mean, the entire package, none of that in any way, shape, or form says that Iran has some civil, energy-oriented, create electricity need or use or plan for all of these systems. And yet we have a State Department that seems to pretend that's in some way, shape, or form the case, and potentially a legitimate argument at that.
They just refuse to acknowledge the power of belief systems and of ideologies and national self-interest holding sway for anybody but the United States. So here you have a theocratic regime in Iran. For them, it's a lived religion. You have true believers. For them to step aside from that belief system undermines or contradicts, their entire belief model. I mean, it's just extraordinary that we wouldn't accept that for what it is. And you're right. Actions are everything in the Middle East. Words mean absolutely nothing. So when you look at the continued enrichment capabilities, where for a civilian nuclear program, you only need low-enriched uranium of about 4 or 5%, and yet Iran is something like 300 kilograms now, around the 20% mark. Once you hit that threshold, you have the technology to then quickly move to highly enriched uranium of 94, 95%, which is what you need for a weapon. So they are amassing huge amounts of more easily weaponizable uranium and plutonium, and we just seem to be oblivious to that fact. They're up to 19,000 plus centrifuges. Half of those are actually operational or working. And we have gone away from getting rid of them to 1,500 and now 4,500. It's just like Iran wins at every step of the way. They continue to modernize their delivery systems. The embargoes that we've had in them are leaky. We're giving away the farm. I think we will rue the day not too many years down the road.
To me, if there was one action that Iran would have taken that could have given them the legitimacy to show that there's maybe some transition towards becoming part of the civilized world, would have been actually to create refinement capacity. One of the strange things about the entire energy program that Iran has for many years is they have all this oil, they have all this wealth, but they haven't had the refinement capacity, which actually limits the use of oil for themselves. And that, to me, would speak volumes for, again, actions over intent. I want to get your quick touch on one other character actor here, which is Turkey. How you see the relationship, and you used the term earlier, the Persian Empire, but you also have to consider the Ottoman Empire here. It seems like Turkey's walking a very fine line between friend and foe to NATO, friend and foe to Iran. I wanted to get your sense of where they fit into this nuclear equation with Iran.
Yeah, Erdogan is just a very strange actor. As a secular state, he is reprised, more of an Ottoman, a Muslim component to Turkish politics. You can certainly see this playing out in how he's dealing with Syria. He doesn't like any one of the three major actors, either the Assad government, ISIS, or certainly the Kurds. It's a Turkish problem. So he's again, like you said, he's walking a line, trying to reassert himself as one of the preeminent leaders of the Muslim world. He would not want to see Iran going nuclear, but he's not going to do anything to stop that, because for right now, the Iranian problem being a distractor for the United States can always be used as leverage, and Erdogan can continue to consolidate his hold on power in Turkey. And it's a very odd thing, Turkey being a NATO member. We have not pressured him on that or leveraged that in any way. But Europe hasn't helped out with that much either. That Turkey wanted to be a member of the European Union. They wanted to have a closer affiliation before Erdogan came to power. And the Europeans just didn't really cotton to that. They didn't warm to the idea. And it's really pushed Turkey onto its own path. And Erdogan seized on that and is trying to, again, elevate Turkey in his own prestige so that they kind of try to reclaim this Ottoman empire role or reputation, very much like we're seeing Putin do in Russia, trying to reclaim the former Soviet ports.
Yeah, that's all really good analysis, and I would add to that. It seems like the powers in Germany and in London, Angela Merkel, who has an interesting relationship herself with Putin, I think the EU has mishandled the situation in Ukraine, both before and after all the craziness that occurred. And I think that it's allowed Turkey and some of these other states to continue on the path that I don't think any of us really think is good for our interest. And I would also argue that it's not in the interest of Turkey either, but they're just being very short-sighted.
Well, that's just it. I agree with you. And I'll go back to your earlier point that weakness invites opportunistic exploitation by bullies, or by other more hungry powers. And so the reason Europe is in the position it's in now is they have weakened themselves through all the social entitlement programs, the social welfare states that they had invested in so heavily. So, they're well below 2% investment of GDP in their military capabilities. They're critically dependent on Russian natural gas for heating and for energy sources. And so there's not much they could do once Putin decided to take Crimea and now destabilize Ukraine, because they don't have the military capability and they don't have the economic strength to stand against the problems that Putin had caused by cutting off energy flows. So it's just another example of if you allow your state situation to become so weakened that when problems do arise, you have no viable options. My great fear is that's the direction we're headed. If you look at national debt and the growing entitlement state, we will continue to see the rise of not only Russia, but China and Iran and others. And we will find ourselves woefully unable to address that from any kind of a strong position. So if you want to see what our future is, just look at where Europe is right now and the problems they're having and their inability to respond to the challenges of Russia and an increasingly independent Turkey.
And I believe John and I share those same concerns. I'll just add two more quick points. One is that you mentioned ideology and that this administration doesn't seem to understand that there's ideologies in play. And I would make the argument, I agree with you, and I find it really complexing and troublesome because this administration is driven by their own ideology. They should recognize it. And the other thing I would add is I think that a lot of the decisions that we and our European friends have made have stirred up. I'm not putting the blame on us, but we've made miscalculations in dealing with, what the lesser of these evils over time, and we've let too many people for decades get away with some things in the name of assistance, and it's kind of what we're about to do with Iran, and we should have learned this lesson already, and unfortunately I think we or our allies or even just the people who live within the Middle East are going to pay a price for it. And there's of course, the blame goes around to everyone. It's not just our problem. It's pretty much everyone has some part of fault here.
That's true, but I think it's a consequence of national self-indulgence and national laziness, where we enjoyed the 90s as a decade of just excess, with the Soviet Union going away. We were hit by the terror attacks, obviously, in 2001, and been completely fixated on that. But it's been very much a self-centered, money-making kind of attitude, and we've gotten lazy and have I think, gendered a belief that the rest of the world is kind of like us. That certainly everybody needs to get away from this religious belief stuff, become very secularized, very logical. In one sense, this is what Secretary Kerry would talk about. Leave your partisan ideology and religious beliefs at the door and just kind of negotiate these things across the table. Well, the rest of the world doesn't work like that. The rest of the world is hungry. It's aggressive. You have very self-confident countries that know who and what they are. The United States, I think, has lost a bit of that. We don't recognize what we were in the 50s, 60s, 70s, what it took to stand against global communism, to export the idea of America and what we represented, but more importantly, represent what kind of threats pose to that idea and what you have to do to stand up against those threats. So we've lost our way at the national level, and I believe the American public needs to be much more vocal and aggressive in reclaiming that mantle. Otherwise, nobody's going to follow us, and when they find their own paths, they'll develop their own capabilities and interests, and those will not be in consonance with the United States interests.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with everything you just said. Well, Dakota Wood. This has been a wonderful discussion. We've thoroughly enjoyed it. We've touched on so many different areas and important issues that not just us, but really the entire world is facing at the moment. So we appreciate it, and we thank the Heritage Foundation. Of course, folks, you could go to the heritage.org to check out what Dakota's working on and all the other wonderful experts there. And again, thank you so much for taking the time this afternoon, and you have yourself a wonderful weekend.
Thanks. It was my pleasure. Have a great weekend.
Okay, take care.